Hey everyone, I invite you to join me in this fantastic conversation with Michael P. Phalen. Mike was at Boston Scientific most of his career and rose to the ranks of EVP and President of MedSurg. Now, if you don't know, Boston Scientific is a company that really revolutionized surgery, specifically less invasive surgery with medical devices such as guide wires, balloons, baskets. Our division, because I work there too, was the urology and the GI or endoscopy divisions. And so it was a really special time in our careers. I wanted to have Mike on because he was there so many years, 30 plus years. B, he rose to the ranks and definitely saw behind the curtain and was on the executive team and did some really great work for Boston Scientific in helping them grow. C is so articulate and smart about the business, and D, he's been to all of our reunions, has seen the group come back together time and time again, and enjoys and feels the energy that we all create together. So here we go. This is the Charging Up Leadership Podcast, and I am your host, Heidi Fry. This podcast is all about energizing you from the inside out, inspiring you to plug in, light up, and just be the best version of yourself in how you live and lead. Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you work for a company like BSC and you watch that company grow from, when we started, it was less than $100 million.
Right.
So by big corporate standards, it would be a startup.
It was just a little baby.
Yeah. And then you watch that company start to hit milestones like, 100 million, 500 million, billion. The organizations evolve and they change and they grow, and you acquire a tremendous amount of knowledge as to what you did, how you did it, and why you did it to help that company, succeed. And then you get a lot of really smart young inventors all over the world that have great ideas. They just they just haven't walked the walk yet. And so they seek out advisors, they seek out consultants, and tell me what to do, tell me what the watch outs are.
Right.
Once you start rolling up your sleeves and getting involved with them, then you realize that you have a huge amount of shared experiences and knowledge that can actually be beneficial to them. So that's
Speaking of inventors, I reached out to John Abley, and he is going to participate in the conversation as well. So
that will be spectacular.
I want to have him because he's the thought behind BSC, and then I want to have you about the culture of BSC. So
John, it was his company,
baby. Yeah.
And I can't tell you the number of times I traveled the world and got to listen to him put perspective around where Boston Scientific was during its journey and where he thought the company could go. And obviously, both John and Pete, they were in the right place at the right time, and they did a fabulous job of creating, what's today one of the largest.
Okay, we're recording, but you have to stop. Let me introduce you, and then let's get going because this is you are so good. How would you like me to introduce you? What title?
I think in the spirit of making this about Boston Scientific, just a retired Boston Scientific executive that spent a long time with one company.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast, Michael Phalen, currently retired, former Boston Scientific executive who rose the ranks, former colleague and friend. Welcome to the podcast to talk about the culture back in the BSC days.
Well, thank you, Heidi. Yeah, it was, I retired. I just recently moved down to South Carolina, and one of the great joys is people ask me, what did you do for a living? I said, I work for Boston Scientific. Everybody knows that company.
Yeah.
To be able to sit back and reflect on, a 30-year journey and to be able to connect the dots with these folks is amazing. I had a conversation with a couple of folks a couple nights ago about pain management. And I said, well, I know a little bit about that business from my experience with neuromodulation.
Mm.
So even though I'm retired, I'm still advocating on behalf of Boston Scientific, which is fun.
For sure, for sure. And I have to say for myself, a lot of people listening probably know this. I obviously was at Boston Scientific at the beginning of my career. And I have to say to this day, it is a real source of pride. I had such great years when I was at Boston Scientific. And just so the listeners know, you and I just saw each other recently, less than a month ago, in Boston, because we had a Boston Scientific reunion, which was and is incredibly special. It was our third one. We can talk about that more at the tail end of our conversation. But I think it's a great backdrop for why we're even having this conversation. It's funny. I looked up the go public date, May 19th of 1992. So May
That's right.
19th, we're like happy anniversary.
Yes, yes. I don't know what the math is, but it's been a great run for the company. The last
Yeah,
10 years,
32,
lots
32
of,
years.
32 has
Yeah.
been, spectacular. And the company today is, performing at an incredible level. It's been fun to watch.
Right. Well, and so when I introduced you, we were kind of modest. I wanted you to go into your career a little bit more because I knew you rep, and then you went into product management. But you just really did. I have to say, I didn't realize until I saw your bio all the incredible things you did with Boston Scientific. Can you give us a couple highlights?
Well, sure. So, I think a lot of people know I started out as a territory manager.
Yeah.
1988. I joined the company the same day. Actually, in fact, Pat Healy and I
Hmm.
were sent out to Columbus, Ohio for training, and it was July 5th, 1988. So Pat and I go back, a long way, certainly to the beginning of my career. But no, I joined the company and was a territory manager operating out of the DC area.
Hmm.
Lived in Northern Virginia and covered basically the District of Columbia, a big chunk of Maryland, and the entire state of Virginia. So back in those days, those territories were, as you know, Heidi, quite
Yeah.
large.
Yeah.
We had many road trips and overnights. But I had a lot of success as a rep. I was fortunate enough to follow a pretty successful microvasive Boston Scientific rep before me. So
Hmm.
at least the name, the company was reasonably well accepted, but still, it was the early days. So you
Hmm.
said, I am Mike from Microvasive, and they'd say, who are you guys? Um, but I was a rep for about 2 years and had a lot of success as a rep. I guess it would have been 1989. Basically won all the awards you could win. I was the rep of the year for both the gastroenterology side of the business and the urology side. So in those days, the operating division was called microvasive, and it was both GI and urology. It was quite a diverse portfolio of products. And there was a real need for people that had been in the field to come in and help the marketing product management side of the organization. And I had always in the back of my mind felt like that was the right path for me. So even though I had really good success, I took a substantial pay cut
Hmm.
and I moved to Boston in end of 1989, early 1990,
Hmm.
and became, one of just a few product managers
Hmm.
for the business. And uh, at that point, we kind of divvied up responsibilities. I was handed the responsibility for the biliary business, which was non-existent at the time.
Hmm.
I think I had biliary and hemostasis, and I think those were the two franchises, a little bit of the dilation. Uh, and I was sort of on the GI side of the equation. And I think it would have been in 91, I believe, is when they decided, leadership at the time
Hmm.
decided that these two businesses were diverse enough that they really needed dedicated focus. And so they split the microvasives into two. the
Mhm.
urology business, which today is, a really outstanding performer for BSC, and of course the GI business, which has been a long time legacy leadership company
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
BSC. And Bob Krajewski was the sales manager who hired me. So I worked for Bob as a sales rep.
Right.
Bob was sort of the national sales manager, if I think that was the title, maybe VP of sales.
Mhm.
And Bob was given the responsibility of leading the GI sales side.
Mhm.
And I don't remember who went on the urology side, but Bob needed to build a sales management structure. And
Yeah.
so he knew I was a pretty proven commodity from my rep days. And then I
Right.
had this product management experience. And he said, listen, I want you to come back outside
Mm.
and be a sales manager for me. So I
Mm.
was one of three sales managers in the early days of microvasive.
Well, and
Mike,
I had lost track of you because I was on the urology side. So that's why I didn't know of any of
yeah,
this, right?
yeah. So, just a natural division of management and
Mhm.
leadership.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so then I went back outside for another 2 years as a sales manager. And that was probably the best job I had in terms of developing true leadership experience because, I had to build a sales team. We hired a lot of reps, and I will pat myself on the back. The people that I hired went on to fame and fortune
Mhm.
inside of Boston Scientific and many of them outside of BSC. And what's so cool about it is when you get to, these reunion meetings or these Boston Scientific retirement get-togethers.
Yeah.
Everybody looks back on those early days at BSC as being ultimately the most formative parts of their careers.
Yeah.
It was a growth company,
Yeah.
it, figuring it out. Leadership challenged each person individually to figure it out. Pretty soon we knew that we needed to develop training and curriculum. And
Mhm.
so we're really a part of a startup organization with a little seed capital from Pete and John on the corporate side. But for the most part, we figured it out on our own to how to pay for the next project and
Yeah.
how to,
Yeah. Yeah.
contribute money. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then the company had started to get some traction, started to really grow. And I knew that I would go back into the marketing role. And so I went back in as like a marketing director. I did that for a couple of years and then eventually became the vice president of marketing.
Mhm.
Once you get to that level inside the corporate structure, you're starting to interface
Yeah.
with senior corporate leadership. And so we had a pretty successful run. And eventually, I became the division president. And
Right.
my longest job at Boston Scientific was running the endo business, and that was for 11 years, which is kind of an eternity now in a big corporation.
For
So,
sure.
11 years gave me, a really good assessment of kind of, the strengths of the endo business. And then BSC started getting bigger and stronger and more diverse.
Mhm.
And Ray Elliott, who was the CEO who exceeded Jim Tobin, Ray was on the board. We had, I don't know, 27 or 28 quarters in a row of
Mhm.
excellent performance. So it was just
Mm.
an
Mm.
incredible run. That business went from 400 million, I don't remember the year, but let's say 2000, around 400 million to about 1.4 billion in the 11
Wow.
years that I was there because it
Wow.
got very global.
Yeah.
Uh, We didn't have the ability to influence the international side of the business. It was all cardiology at that time.
Mhm.
So Steve Marizzi was running was one of the leaders there. We started investing our own people in international roles. We paid for it
Mhm.
on our own P&L.
Yeah.
And that paid huge dividends because uh, a lot of expats went overseas. They knew
Mhm.
our culture, they knew our
Mhm. Mhm.
process, and they influenced those regions. And eventually, before I left endoscopy, we were about 50% of our revenue was coming from outside the US.
Wow.
It's unheard of in Boston Scientific.
Yeah, yeah. And I saw that you were running that division at some point. you ran international. Yeah. Was that while
Yeah,
you
so
were
what
both?
happened was what happened was we were doing so well, and international was a bit of a struggle. And so Ray Elliott said, I need you to let go of Endo. I
Hmm.
want you to take over and be the president of Boston Scientific International. And that job was an interesting job. It was my first venture outside of the endo discipline.
Yeah.
What I found was there was a lot of cultural similarities among the other businesses, but there was a lack of cohesiveness, a lack of focus,
Hmm.
um, and uh, we had sort of a methodology, a rhythm, and the international businesses were just different. They were all different.
Sure. Sure.
So I did that for a couple of years, and then Mike Mahoney transitioned to become the CEO. Ray retired, and when Mike got on board, he wanted a different reporting structure, and so we divvied up the international markets. He took Asia and Europe. I took the rest of the country, rest of the world, and then we created a reporting segment called MedSurg.
Okay.
So my corporate responsibilities were endoscopy, urology, neuromod,
All right.
Latin America, Canada. And then I had a couple of corporate functions. I had corporate IT and I had government affairs. And that's kind of how my
That's a
career.
lot. That's a
Yeah.
lot.
So,
And so that's a lot more than the ASAP needle.
yes. But the really cool part about it was, we had this wonderful microvasive early day reunion, a couple times now, and we could do the exact same thing at the BSC corporate level because what ends up happening is once you get into like the urology business, once I
Yeah.
started looking at that was a
Mhm.
wonderful group of people, great culture, so similar to endoscopy. The neuromod business was drastically different, but still filled with great people. I mean,
So
top notch.
so let's go down that path because every time we've gotten together, which has been 3 times now, everyone reminisces about how amazing that culture was. So what was the magic? What was the specialness of that time? And especially for me, I'm thinking you started in 88 and we went public in 92. And it's like in that window, we were growing like crazy and we were putting numbers on the board that were amazing and everyone was fired up and there were so many components that now as a leadership coach, as a development specialist, I refer back to those lessons myself all the time because I saw it in action. It was such a great model for me. So I would love to pull it apart and dissect it a little bit because people always ask, I don't know what it was. And do you remember when we were in Atlanta, Chris Rowland had sent in a video, and it was the last one that I showed. And I really remember how it resonated with everyone because he said, I've worked for a lot of different companies and I've never been able to recreate what we had at BSC. And
Yeah.
everyone was like nodding their head and they all agreed. So let's go down that path.
Well, this question's been asked a few times over my career, certainly while I was working at BSC
Yeah.
and even as I reflect back as having retired. So, I assign it to the people, right? It started with Pete and John,
Hmm.
and then there was a really nice leadership team in the early days of microvasive. Today, Boston Scientific, Mike Mahoney captured it as the winning spirit. That is his cultural value. Like we're just going to be better than everybody else out there. We're going to make mistakes, but we're going to try, but we're going to be better. And the
Hmm.
market's going to see us as being the company of choice.
Right.
That is a current cultural value inside of BSC. And we had that in the early days at
Hmm.
Boston Scientific. We may not have called it the winning spirit, but
Hmm.
it was palpable. And I'll give you the simplest example, the one that resonated the most with me.
Hmm.
My first DDW would have been 1980, 1989, I believe, right?
Okay.
Because I missed it in 88. And, we had I don't know, 20-foot booth, 30-foot booth, nothing fancy.
Hmm.
Uh, we were all dressed in business attire. So in those days, we were wearing suits and ties. Everybody
Yeah.
dressed really well. And it was expected by the leadership that you would dress appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably the lone rebel because I had a mustache, which is a little bit forbidden at that point in time. But everybody was clean shaven.
Yeah.
Everybody looked professional.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this moment. We finished the day, the first day, and we probably had 30 or 40 people attending the meeting, maybe 50 people.
Yeah.
And they were turning the hall lights out in the exhibit hall.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us reconvened at 5 o'clock at the microvasive booth.
Right.
And we spent 45 minutes, right? Everybody was gone. We were the only company left. We spent 45 minutes debriefing on what went well, why did it go well, what went wrong, why did it go wrong, what could we do better the next day. And we met, there's an old expression, you get what you measure.
Yeah.
And in those days, getting leads was our metric. How many leads did we qualify?
Mm-hmm.
So we would recap that meeting. Well, that process went on for years and years and years. And it got so disheartening to our competition because they're all heading off to the local bar, and we were, cohesive as a
Yeah.
unit.
Yeah.
That's probably the single thing that stood out in my mind is, oh, this is a different kind of company. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to attribute it to the early leaders of the company. They wanted
Yeah.
discipline, they wanted execution, they wanted focus, and they wanted us to look different than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 years of my career at BSC, that's what happened. We looked different,
Mm-hmm.
we acted different, and we had the results to back it, which was kind of a cool thing.
It was so cool. You know what I thought you were going to say? I was at that DDW, and I don't know if this is the meeting that I'm remembering, but I recall being at a meeting early on, and somebody wore what they would call a louder tie, a not so conservative tie. And it was
Sure.
the end of our week. And they were like, well, this is the only one that I've got. Wear something that you already wore because that's not acceptable. And so I saw Jay at the baseball game, and I was telling him, because I was the only female at the time, and
Yeah.
I had worn a cream colored suit that was asymmetrical jacket with this cool sash, and I had a red blouse on, red shoes, looking fine. And he took me we were in the elevator, I don't know, going to lunch or something, and he said, don't ever wear that again. And I was like, what? So we talked about it at the baseball game just, a couple of weeks ago. And he said his philosophy was the product should shine. It shouldn't be about the reps. And he said, maybe I got a little bit too harsh with that, but it was that idea of we were the backdrop to this cool, innovative, cutting edge product line that we had. And we were unified, and it was cool. It was really cool
Yeah.
stuff.
I mean, a lot of people today would look at that and frown upon it because of, diversity, inclusion, all the things
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are relevant in today's world. But back in the day, I think I think Jay said it well. We were trying to portray a look and an image. And again, you have to recognize we were not the company of choice. In
No.
those days, it was Olympus, it was Cook,
Bard.
it was Bard. We were the new kids on the block, and we wanted to be a little bit different. And
Right.
so, as the company matured and aged, and people realized that it's evolved. So today it's a very different point. But today, Boston Scientific, is among the market leaders. It's
Yeah.
probably the
Yeah.
market leader.
Yeah.
And so
We were more
evolved.
mavericks.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other
So,
thing, I'm sorry,
no,
go ahead.
no, you go.
I said the other thing that was interesting in the early days is we didn't have a big bureaucracy. We
Mm,
didn't have a huge management structure. It was pretty lean. It had to be because the margins weren't quite there. And so, you were empowered early in your career. If you raised your hand and said, listen, I want to go down the management path, right? we were looking for dynamic leadership
Yeah.
because of the growth. And not everybody who chose to raise their hand that said, I want to be a leader, not everybody made it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Some people realized they were much stronger individual contributors than, somebody that could influence a group. But that was really compelling. And for me, personally, in my career, having been given the keys to a product franchise and had to go figure it out on my own
Yeah.
was the best thing. It prepared me to be a general manager because I was doing stuff that today's product managers would never touch, because there's somebody in the corporation that's a subject matter expert, for example, in
Right.
pricing or health economics or reimbursement or regulatory. Where when I was a product manager, I got to do whatever I wanted to do as long as it
Sure.
was
Sure.
within the guidelines. But you figured it out, and eventually, as BSC started to grow, you started to complement those product management resources
Mm-hmm.
with deeper subject matter expertise, supply chain, regulatory, clinical, medical.
Mm-hmm.
But those formative years were spectacular because you got to kind of do it yourself, and really you could teach a class on the subject afterwards.
Do you think that's what attracted a lot of people? Because it was, not everyone has the courage to go with a startup. And you're right, it was a smaller company at the time. I remember being pitched it by a recruiter, and it's like, it's this little baby firm and it's growing like crazy. And there was something exciting about that. So I've often thought we all have so much in common from those days. Was that it? I mean, was that
Well,
the
I think it was two things. I think one, I think the leadership at the time, Bob Krajewski on the GI side, Bob recognized early in our career the importance of the sales management team interacting with recruiters.
Mhm.
So today, Boston Scientific has its own recruiting network.
Yeah.
But in those days, we used folks outside the Boston Scientific walls to attract the talent. So as a sales manager, we got measured, metriced, and graded
Mm.
on how many times how many new recruiters did we develop, and how many recruiters were recruiting the kind of background and profile that we were looking for to build out the sales and marketing structure,
Yeah.
to build up the organization. And I think we probably did a better job than most companies have ever done.
For sure.
And if you
I was
think
gonna
about,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no, go.
I was gonna say, if you think about the life of a sales manager back in the early 1990s,
Yeah.
you had maybe a half a day of office work, and the rest of the time you were in the field,
Yep.
and you had at least 1 or 1.5 days a week full-time recruiting. And let me tell you why that's important. We built up a network of recruiters that understood the microvasive and the Boston Scientific methodology, and they attracted great people. And great people attract great people.
Right.
So I'm sure it's happened to you, Heidi, but you come on board, and then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 of your peers and colleagues from your previous company get attracted. And next thing you know, you got these, this network building. And we saw that happen over and over and over and over again. The other thing that happened was that the recruiters would then be proactive with us. Like,
Mm.
I found somebody that's really good. And we knew that we were growing so fast. So we went out over our skis, and
Mhm.
we created territories sometimes before the formula was fully baked.
Yeah.
And we did a fantastic job. And then when Mike Jones took over the sales organization, after Bob moved on to some different projects, Mike got really, really proactive on never having open territories.
Mm.
So Boston Scientific, at that point, we were a successful company. We were growing.
Right.
Our commercial teams were getting cherry picked, sometimes by our own
Yeah.
sister company,
Sure.
sometimes
Sure.
by our competition.
Mhm.
And so there was a big effort led by Mike and his team to never have an open territory.
Mm.
So we were proactively getting rid of sales reps that couldn't do the job the way we wanted it to be done. And so they would exit the company, and the new person would come in and there was never any downtime. I mean, there was a point where that metric was measured on a monthly basis in my management review meetings, and it was world-class threshold. We were like,
Right.
90% full
Yeah.
for 10 years. And
Well,
so that contributed to, this is a good place to go. If you want to be a
mhm.
rep and you want to be in a dynamic spot in medicine, which is this less invasive, minimally invasive intervention, we were the right place at the right time, and we found the right people.
For sure. And the philosophy, and by the way, the counterpart to Bob, would that have been Steve Oakland or Buddha?
I don't remember. I mean, I really don't remember who
That's
it was.
okay. That's all
It
right.
was probably Steve Oakland on the urology side
Mhm,
for a while.
mhm.
But like you said, once you got focused in one of those disciplines, the two companies could have been on opposite
Yeah.
sides of the globe, and it
Mhm.
would have been fine because we didn't
Yep.
interact.
Yep. For sure. Well, what I was going to say is that philosophy that I would credit what I saw it coming through Buddha, it could have been started somewhere else, but the philosophy of we can teach you product knowledge. We can't teach you heart. We can't teach you character. We can't teach you drive. And I spent, I don't know, 5, 6 years as a recruiter myself while I was having my kids, so I didn't have to travel. And I would get company owners telling me I need somebody that has a book of business, or I need somebody that knows this product. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not how you do it. And I'm a big, big fan and proponent of a star player is a star player is a star player, no matter what industry you put them in. And I think I learned that at BSC in our past life.
Well, and the other thing that was really attractive to the recruiters is, we weren't hiring kids off a college campus. We were hiring, young adults or young professionals, a few
Mm-hmm.
years after school. And while we were growing, we also recognized the need to put energy and effort into a sales leadership, sales management training curriculum. And
Right.
if you remember sort of the pillars of the sales disciplines or the commercial discipline inside of microvasive at the time, you had a really world-class sales training department. And
Mm-hmm.
the full-time job was sales training. And it was not just the product knowledge and the marketing component, but it was really beginning to teach the organization a more refined selling process. We didn't want to have, you know, I don't know what the number was, 300 reps all, going at it differently. We wanted a, consistent
Mm-hmm.
look.
Mm-hmm.
So again, people made that decision, leaders made that decision, and it resulted in, world-class sales operation
Yeah.
and world-class sales training. And so if you're a young person looking for a career in medicine, you can go to a J&J, and obviously great company, or you can go to a company like Boston Scientific that was, doing things faster and more innovative than the
Mm-hmm.
historical richness of say J&J.
Mm-hmm.
And today, I think Boston Scientific continues to excel in that area.
Well, I always refer to it as a very happy accident on my part that I answered the call and was intrigued enough to go, because it was a really special place for sure. And the first sales model that I remember us learning, I had just come from Xerox, and it was the spin model, which we had
Sure.
learned it. So it was just interesting. So I knew that, Xerox is touted for or known for their sales training. So to have that be already introduced at BSC was very cool. So, all right. So I wrote down a couple different, or I thought of a couple different areas that maybe spoke to the vibe that we had that continued, right? That grew. Um, and I'm just going to list them off because I think we can really go down a lot of different paths here. One, to your point, leadership and the founders. The founders, okay, so I said I was going to read them off and then I don't. Founders, leadership, vision, mission, the culture, of course, we've been talking about core values, innovation, adaptability, collaboration, transparency, resiliency, right? All of these words to me were super present, and the consistency and it was just a real, what's the word I want? Um, a desire, or it's not a desire. It's deciding to live by those values every single day.
Yeah.
Commitment. There you go. Commitment.
Yep. Well, you know, you said to me before we started the podcast, you know, it was great seeing you in Boston, and you changed, you look more relaxed. And you know, that is because I, you know, certainly retired, but one of the, you know, those early cultural things that maybe the rep side of the equation didn't feel, but the leadership team, myself and others felt, was, you know, sort of fear of failure.
Mm.
Right. That was a big motivating factor for me. So, you know, we worked hard. I'm not going to say we were the only hardworking company
Yeah.
out there.
Yep.
We worked hard.
We
We
did.
put
We
long
ran
hours.
fast.
And the thing that used to, you know, keep me awake at night was fear of being beaten to the, you know, beaten to the pitch, or with a better analogy, the fear of being out innovated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know, one of the early cultural vibes, if you will, that kept us going was this constant need to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
And as a company gets bigger, the innovation dynamic gets harder, right? Because you have to spread the money around a bigger portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yesterday's new technology, or today's new technology, is yesterday's old technology, right? And those life cycles get shorter and shorter.
Right.
So, you know, as a division president, your probably number one responsibility is to make sure you get the right people in the right seats.
Mm-hmm.
And your second responsibility is to lead the strategic direction and the innovation plan. So, you know, we were able to foster that sense of urgency around making sure we got new products out on time, and we got sort of meaningful new products out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing to develop, a next generation derivative. It's another thing to have something that's never been done before and
Mm-hmm.
is becoming the gold standard. And so one of the things that stood out in my early experiences at BSC was we were able to communicate with the selling organization. They had a seat at the table. And a lot of companies, they kind of think that the sales thing is easy.
Right.
Commercial viability is everything. It's the
Mm-hmm.
only thing that matters. First line in a P&L is revenue. Another word for revenue is sales.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so if you don't have your selling team sitting at the leadership table, helping to influence what we need, when we need it, how we need it, that makes a huge difference. And so there's always been this sense of urgency. And I suspect today it's still paramount in the company. You know, Boston Scientific today is a much more acquisitive company. It does a lot of M&A, does a
Mm-hmm.
lot of tuck-in M&A. It does,
Yeah.
usually it'll do transformative M&A. The company is, you know, operating today at a all-time high because of its innovation cycle,
Mm-hmm.
because of the new products that have been impacted. So new products were the lifeblood of the company, and you know, you just couldn't do them fast enough. And at the time in endoscopy, particularly endoscopy and urology at the time, these were emerging disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
So if we came out with a better guide wire, we came out with a better cutting device, we came out with a better hemostasis product or a better balloon, you know, those products were quickly taken up by the market. And the cool thing that I can stand with conviction today is we became the standard of care. So
Yeah.
the Boston Scientific portfolio anywhere in the world is
Mm-hmm.
the standard of care.
Yeah.
And that is a super motivating thing. Even today, I'm retired, I still get energized by it.
Yeah. 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 Well, and that for our reunion, one of the founders, John Abley, recorded a message for us, and he talked about how we were changing, uh, revolutionizing medical medical procedures, and it was really an interesting.
Well, you know, you don't have to go very far. Boston Scientific had its earnings call, just a few weeks ago, and the stock hit a, you know, all-time high as a result of a pipeline strategy that's being executed beautifully. Mike Mahoney was talking about this Farapulse technology that's used for AFib patients.
Okay.
You know, huge patient population, unmet need.
Right.
This technology is game changing. It's got great data, and he said it's the most exciting patient impacting therapy that he's ever experienced in his career in medtech. And
That's a
so
lot.
the whole innovation life cycle continues. And, the good news about Boston Scientific today is that it has the ability to develop its own organic pipeline, and it has the ability to acquire companies and fit it into the pipeline. And so that gives BSC a scale advantage that's, really, really hard to compete with.
I love that they are not still, but they are so strong and thriving. And I am also proud to say that we were there in the beginning, making, building the foundation that allowed them to scale, right? Every time we were in a meeting and it was double-digit growth, not just like as in 12 or 13, it was 50, 60, 70, 100% growth. It was
Yes.
pretty amazing time, right?
Well, yeah, and those growth dynamics kind of gave us a little bit of a math formula for building the company.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cool. We knew if we get to this level, we could add this many reps. We
Mm-hmm.
could add this many
Mm-hmm.
marketing people. We could add this many R&D. Today it's a little harder because the numbers are huge. These are big, big companies. I don't
Yeah.
know exactly where endo and urology are, but endo is well over 2 billion, and I think the urology business is approaching 2 billion or very, very close. So, those are big,
Big
big, big business
numbers. Yeah.
on their own.
Yeah.
But yeah, we contributed to an innovation culture that exists today, and it's part of the reason why BSC stood out then and stands out today.
So, okay, let's talk chicken and egg. Does the culture shape the leader, or does the leader shape the culture?
Well, I think it's both. Boston Scientific has had its ups and downs, right? Corporately,
Yeah.
right? We had
Yeah.
periods where it was, a tremendous run, and we had periods where the company was challenged. I think the culture in the case when the company was down, the culture was always there. It needed to be drawn out. To
Zhuzhed
Mike
up.
Mahoney,
Us
yeah,
girls would say zhuzhed up.
yeah, well, to Mike Mahoney's great credit, I think he saw that and he was able to build on that, right?
Mm.
But add more discipline on the execution side, more accountability on that side. I think in the case of the microevasives, there's never been a down year, so
Mm.
they've always grown. And I think that the organizations have evolved. I mean, there's been a couple of periods where they brought folks from the outside in and
Yeah.
it didn't really work out. And for the most part, it's been, leadership that's been somewhat developed from within.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously companies, there's lots of ways to be successful. Nobody has a monopoly on it.
Right.
But I think the original foundational culture that John and Pete and others built today, I think it cuts through BSC all the way. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, um, it's just really cool to see that. But when we went to the reunion and everybody chats, people that were affiliated with a franchise or a product, you can hear how proud they are. I mean, talking to Jim Urich, Jim was the Jaguar franchise leader, and that product today
Which
is,
is a wire. Yeah.
yeah, it's standard of care today. And
Mhm.
and so that's something he probably worked on that 25 years ago.
Sure, exactly. Well, and so speaking of the reunion, but before we go to the reunion, I do have one more question for you specifically. Looking back on your lengthy history within Boston Scientific, what are you most proud of?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, and we haven't talked about it, but it was so present uh, back in the early formative days, is we put the patient first.
Mm.
That concept resonates with me because it wasn't too long in my career at BSC where family members were starting to needed medical intervention. Aunts, uncles, grandparents,
Yeah.
moms, dads, brothers, sisters. Boston Scientific used to do and continues to do the thing they call quality days. And
Mm.
so go to a manufacturing plant and we would bring in doctors, nurses, and patients.
Mm.
They would talk about their experience ultimately getting and receiving a Boston Scientific intervention or Boston Scientific device.
Right.
And, for the person working in the manufacturing facility to hear, a real person talk about, the product they built and
Mhm.
how it found its way into their, into their body or into their disease intervention is a big deal. And, so today, even though I'm retired and I talk about it, I mention this all the time to people. It's like, yeah, we played a big role in helping people live better, more productive lives, and it still happens today. In fact, in those quality days, we would often, as a leader, I would often give a corporate speech, 20-minute
Mhm.
overview. And I would often start off by saying, how many people in this room, you'd have a room with, 3, 4, 500 people. You
Right.
say, well, how many people in this room have either had personally or have had a family member be the beneficiary of a Boston Scientific innovation, device, implant, et cetera? Raise your hand. And everybody's hands went up,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So what that means is BSC at the local level, doesn't matter where you are, Michigan, South Carolina, Boston, Las Vegas, California, Boston Scientific is part of the local healthcare ecosystem.
Sure.
And that's real and that's palpable. And then the cool part about being an executive of the company and getting a chance to spend time in the markets outside the United States, that same principle applies outside the US, whether
Mm.
Latin
Mm.
America, Asia, Europe. People at the end of the day benefit from our technology. We didn't always do it right. We made mistakes. We had issues. We corrected them. But for the most part, I think John Averly would say, we leaned on the side of the angels. And I
Mm.
think that was a cultural, like, we want to do the right thing.
I'm so glad you said that, because when I asked what you were proud of and you said patient centric, I was thinking from my perspective, yes, of course, patient centric, but I could always count on our organization to do the right thing. So the fact that you just said that,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. And
Perfect.
I lost my mom last year. My mom's life was extended
Mm.
about
Mm.
probably 7 or 8 years because of Boston Scientific device.
Aw. Aw. I'm
And
sorry for your loss.
well, that's okay. I appreciate that. But um, my mom needed to have a pacemaker put in, and it was a special kind of pacemaker put in and kept her going for another 10 years. And I have a brother that is a beneficiary of Boston Scientific neuromodulation implantable pulse generator for debilitating chronic back pain. My daughter works for Boston Scientific. My
Yes.
daughter works in the endoscopy business in Dallas,
Wait.
and
Now say a little bit more. What did she just achieve? I heard.
she
The
was the
apple
founder.
doesn't fall far from the cart or from the
She
tree,
was
if I remember.
not last year, the year before, she won President's Club and Founders Award. So, and for her, it's all about her. She is the face of Boston Scientific to her doctors and her
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
So she, it's alive and well even today. And I know that firsthand because of Molly's excellence there. But yeah, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people's lives. You want to do the
Yeah.
right thing.
Yep. So back to what brought us all together, which is that love of our mission, perhaps understanding this, our mission and the vision of the company and what the founders shared and the innovation, all these things that we've been talking about caused us all to get together again. So we did our first reunion in 2015. We had 25 people technically come from around the world for a 3-hour happy hour.
Yeah.
Darren came from Switzerland. We had people from 3-hour happy hour. Of course, we stayed out all night and made it more of like a 24-hour happy hour.
Yes.
And then we did Atlanta in 2021, and we just did Boston in 2024, of course. That's
Yeah.
unheard of. And we
Yes.
had 25 people at the first one. We had, because it was COVID years, we had about 25 or 30 in Atlanta. And we originally had 45 signed up in Boston. And because of everything from dad's 80th birthday party
Sure.
to health diagnosis. We were down to about 35 or so, or 30 for our Boston reunion, but it's crazy, right?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what I think is so cool. I mean, it's wonderful to get to connect with everybody.
Mhm.
But, we're talking 30 or 40 people. It could have been 200,
Yeah,
250
yeah,
people, right?
yeah. Mhm.
But what I found is that there are people in the company or people that have left Boston Scientific over the years who still have this network of contacts that they're still engaged with.
Yeah.
So, the power of LinkedIn and the social media platforms sort of make us all feel pretty connected. Just as an example, my wife and I and friends of ours, uh, we were in Europe last year, maybe last year or the year before, and I was able to have dinner in Switzerland with Darren.
Aw.
So, so small world. I hadn't talked to Darren in years.
Yeah.
And I do a little bit of skiing still. So when I'm out in the Utah area, I see Blake Henderson and
Aw.
Don Pettigrew and that crew. So the network is alive. It's, people are busy with their lives, but everybody looks back fondly on those early
Yeah.
days because it was special. It
It
was
was
a
special.
special time. It was a
Yeah.
special place, and we were all super fortunate to find our way into that ecosystem and
Mhm.
be part of it.
Well, speaking of Darren, did you know that he had gotten a plane ticket to do the red eye, come for Saturday night's
Yeah.
party from Switzerland, and then
Yes.
head back?
Yes.
They changed his flight. He texted me the following day and said he couldn't make it. That
Yes.
that speaks to exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
The other observation I made while we were there, people listening might think, oh yeah, reliving their glory days. It's like a bunch of football players that just want to talk about how great they are. We're not really talking about the glory days. We're of course acknowledging them, and we might even be swapping stories. That's for sure a fun part of it. But
Yeah.
it's more about just honoring the people in the room and wanting to connect, because at the end of the day, we were all friends.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you look at some of those pictures and you remember sitting in a ballroom somewhere in some hotel in some city with some banner behind your head and somebody teaching something, and it just brought back lots of giggles and lots of great memories. But you're right, it's not about bragging about what we're doing. It's just
So,
all recognizing that we were part of something pretty special. And I suspect for anybody that kind of went through a period of growth like we did, you're just going to have lots of memories and lots of really fun stories to tell, and that's really what it was all about. And besides, I think it was awesome to find out what people have been doing the last few years of their lives and where they're at. That's been enjoyable as well.
for sure. I just saw an email from Chris Pearson talking about how John Abley was such an inspiration, because he himself is a bit of a dabbler in innovation and has some patents. And anyway,
Yeah.
so I think this has just been a really great conversation. My only sadness is that we could talk for another 3 hours. Honestly, there's so much there about the leadership and the culture that we haven't even touched on. Any closing thoughts or advice you would make or give to leaders?
Well, at the end of the day, you know, I used to say this to people all the time. Every person mattered, right? And some people chose to engage and try to influence and try to direct the organization. Other people were more comfortable sort of receiving the direction. But it's the combination, is having a culture where the ideas are welcomed and accepted makes all the difference. And as we were talking at the very beginning, um, you know, it would be impossible for us to recreate that period in our lives. One, we're, 40 years older, uh,
Speak for
to,
yourself.
you know, to the markets, have changed dramatically. And Boston Scientific's not a startup company anymore. It's, a
Right.
well-established, publicly traded company with, big institutional investors and really good dynamic leadership. But to say, hey, we were a part of that and we contributed to that, and ultimately to let the next generation
Yeah.
lead it is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And when we talk to the folks at the reunion, it's sometimes hard because a lot of people are retiring, like
Mhm.
they're done working, and it's a big adjustment. I'm sure everyone goes through it. It's a big adjustment when you're in a position of influence and maybe some power to just being sort of a regular person. Um, but the memories and the recognition that we did good work and that we've contributed to a company that's on really strong footing, that's extraordinarily rewarding. And I look back on my Boston Scientific days with admiration and respect for all the people I worked with, and there were so many great people. And
Sure.
doing a podcast like this, you can't recognize all those individuals that made a difference in you individually. And there's just a lot of people that helped shape my direction and influence me, and vice versa. So yeah, it's all good.
Speaking of you, my observation is that because we haven't stayed in great contact over the years, other than at the reunions, I think you're the most authentic you that you've been. And it's just really wonderful, wonderful to see the man, but the leader, the person, the husband that you are, the friend. And I know that BSC helped shape part of that. That, of course, is partially based on your lovely wife, Terry. And of course, a long history, 10-year age, all that. But thank you so much for joining me today and sharing yourself.
Hey, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, you're right. We could probably spend a couple of days talking about the early days of BSC, but great company, great people, great experience.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I hope you have a great rest of the day.
All right, Heidi, thank you.
Thank you. I just finished up my conversation with Mike Phalen. Fantastic. Honestly, we needed another few hours or days to talk about all the things that we wanted to talk about. Matter of fact, off camera, we talked about a number of topics that didn't even make it into the podcast. One of them was his challenge, because he'd been promoted so quickly, having to manage people who were his friends and who were on his team, and the complication of that and becoming, quote unquote, the boss. Another topic we discussed was the role of women in the organization and how he wished he knew back then what he knows now, and HR policies, and wish we could have been more proactive in handling that dynamic as well. So that was a good conversation for us privately. At the end of the day, I think we thrived. I'll use that word, thrived, because we were so dedicated and committed to our core values. And there was just we don't have time for that. It was, we will make time for that. And I think that's an important component for companies, whether big or small, going forward. And then the other thought I had was, within my model, for those of you who know, it's like the 3-tiered model. At the bottom is core self, which is also authenticity. And I think the reason we were so happy, excited, driving hard, and successful, thriving at Boston Scientific, was because we were encouraged to do the right thing. More importantly, to be the best version of ourselves, to be individual leaders, right? Sole contributors and leaders within our own territories. Mike said during the interview, we were given a lot of autonomy and power within our own territories, and being the best version of ourselves. being our authentic selves. And yes, of course, egos were involved in all that, but we really didn't have a lot of time for that. We were driving and working so hard. So isn't that cool that we were working hard, but yet it was the happiest time in our careers? So it wasn't about the hard work or not hard work. It was being allowed to be ourselves and being encouraged to be ourselves and authentically being empowered. It was just really a great time. So anyway, I hope you got something out of this great conversation. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thanks.
You have been listening to the Charging Up Leadership podcast, and I am your host, Heidi Fry, charged up, plugged in, and sending you energy, light, and love. Find me at HeidiFry.com. And don't forget to check out my book, The Light Switch, available on Amazon, in your local bookstores, or on my website. The Charging Up Leadership podcast is created, hosted, and produced by Heidi Fry. Theme music is by Yevchen Anoychenko from Pixabay.